the reason we, use REM in the way that we do is it is working with imagination. So it's really working with the nonverbal part of the brain where the trauma memory is anchored, where it's
Yeah.
imprinted.
That was a
So
key word. Oh, sorry, that was a key word that jumped out at me when you talked about how it is in the nonverbal part of the brain. Because
mhm,
when we dip beneath logic in our processing of the emotions in a RIM experience, we trust spontaneous imagination to know where to take us,
right.
and that's so different than a more intellectual process of asking what the client thinks they need to talk about. The client doesn't remember. It's not because you said life has moved on and
Right.
it's still in the background, but it anchored in the nonverbal part of the brain. We're not going to access the conscious awareness talking brain doesn't have access to that data. And so I think that's where it's so key, like to know what is the trauma that needs to be worked with. And
Yes.
so I'm working with a business client and they think it's about, oh, well, my parents divorced and I was left this and this is my whole story and that all happened when I was 8. And then the body memory comes in of the a bully on the playground scene that changes everything, right? We're not looking for solving what they think is the big trauma. It might be one of those small t traumas that's running their life
Right.
and they don't know it because it was one of those things that's anchored in the nonverbal part of the brain. So that was like the big juicy thing that grabbed my attention
Yes.
on that.
And that it's been, thank you, Mike. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. And just to piggyback on that story, because what we're talking about is the difference between the conscious memory and the unconscious memory, the emotional memory that's unconscious, and we forget about them. So that there was a woman in her 30s, her early 30s, who was very successful in her business, but she was very unsuccessful in relationships. She had never really dated much, and she was in her 30s and she wanted to get married. She wanted to have children. She knew that was her intention. And so in her REM session, the image that showed up was the fifth grade cafeteria line. And then she said, I don't know why. I don't remember anything from this. But then it's just be in that, just be with it, because the unconscious will reveal the whole story. It's amazing. I mean, Jung said that. If we really pay attention to what our unconscious is revealing, the whole story gets revealed. And so the whole story that got revealed was she standing in the fifth grade cafeteria line, and one of her classmates, a boy, walked up to her and said, "You're ugly." And those of us that are fifth grade girls, once upon a time, know how sensitive we are at that age about how we look. And so in that moment, she was holding back the tears, trying not to look like she's upset, and she just wants to crawl under the table and hide. And so that moment in time got stuck. And so now we've reopened that memory. Now we can regenerate it. So we called in a resource, a safety resource, so she could feel safe. Her mother showed up. With her mother there, I had her talk to the boy, and what she said is, what do you want to say to him? And she said, why did you do that? Why did you say that? That really hurt my feelings. And so when we tuned in, when she moved over, looked through the boy's eyes, what she sensed from him, and I see there are some men in the group, and having been fifth grade boys, and there's Mike here, Michael, that fifth grade boys are very awkward, and it's very common. Those of us that have had, fifth grade sons can see where he said, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's because I like you." Because I like you. So, how would she have ever known that? She would never have known that. Well, in that moment, her whole body image at a very deep, visceral level regenerated. And so, within a few months, she met somebody she liked. They, a year later, got married. They have two children now. And so that's kind of how that memory in the brain is so critical, that really in dealing with trauma, to really, heal trauma, we have to do it at that level. And it doesn't do it at that level to talk about it. It gives you, talking about it gives relief. It helps get you desensitized to it. Those are very valuable things. So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that the body visceral memory is really makes a huge difference when we heal at that level. There are all those levels.
Dr. Deb, there's a question in the chat of how does this type of processing in the brain, how does this compare to EMDR?
So it's working with the same system as EMDR, but in a different way. So that in EMDR, you're primarily starting with a trauma experience that you're wanting to desensitize to, you're wanting to work with. In RIM, we don't start with any specific content. So that the through body awareness and imagination, that there is a we are following the client's visceral experience rather than starting with, we're going to start with this memory. So what is revealed is not always consciously identified as something that was uncomfortable. Like with this woman, like she didn't know that it was the fifth grade cafeteria line where this happened, that that was the source of the issue. And she could never have known. And I would say it's quite common with RIM because we're trusting what we call the emotional operating system, which is what I discovered when I started playing with RIM. Was if I really start to pay attention to the client's experience more than my trying to guide them, that that we're the client, our EOS is actually very resourced. We're actually extremely resourced. We're just not, we're overriding our inner knowing, our visceral experience, the way our EOS operates. We're overriding it with thinking. And so in RIM, we're really going back and forth between the left and the right kind of processing of the brain, the logical brain and the imaginative, emotional part of the brain. We're really collaborating there.
And
So,
Dr. Deb, just
yes,
to, I think you've just answered this question, but to connect it to the next question in the chat, is there are folks who have many, many of these traumas. Is there a process for what order to tackle them? So
yes,
maybe connect that back.
yes, perfect. And I did just answer it because we don't intellectually decide to work on a trauma with a client, then we let the emotional operating system reveal what needs to be worked with first, second, third. The one thing that happens with RIM is you get very immediate results because you're working at the unconscious level. So people look different, act different immediately, and they don't even know it. Then we have to say, pay attention so your conscious mind and your unconscious mind are in unity about what's happening here.